In order to install XAMPP, which provides you the local host on your machine and gives you the ability to run PHP and MySQL databases, go over to apachefriends.org, select the version that you want to download. So whatever, if you're using Windows, Linux, or OS X. Currently I'm on a Windows machine. So simply do the download of the application and then initiate the install process. And once you've downloaded it, you can begin to initiate the setup process. So for the most part, the default settings are pretty good. If you're not looking to use the Mercury mail server or Tomcat or FileZilla, you can uncheck those. And of course, if you're not looking to use a database, you can uncheck that as well. But for the most part, usually I just go with the default settings. So definitely, if I want to use PHP and if I want to use MySQL database, I'd make sure that Apache, MySQL, phpmyadmin, and PHP are all checked off. And then these are also optional programs as well. So you can simply uncheck them if you don't want to use them within the install. And then selecting the folder that you want to set that up on. So by default, it's just going to go create a brand new XAMPP folder. So I already do have some files in there because I already do have XAMPP installed. So I'm just going to simply click OK for this and update the folder that I'm going to be doing the install on. So I'm going to do XAMPP 4. Here it gives me an option to learn more about XAMPP and the different free installers. So it's got default installers. So if you're looking for WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, and there's a whole bunch of these really cool installers that you can get as well for XAMPP. So I don't necessarily need to learn more about that, but of course it is worthwhile checking that out. So now it's going to go through that install process and the setup process. So one of the things to keep in mind when you are using XAMPP, and one of the common problems, is that you might have port conflicts with other applications that you might already have on your system. Because by default, XAMPP is going to use port 80, and 80 is the default web communication port. So if you're using programs like Skype or other programs that might have conflicting ports, you got to be mindful of that, and you'd have to adjust what port you're going to be using by default within the XAMPP. So if I go over to here, I can adjust ports, and I can see the default ports that I'm using are 80 and 443, so that's this HTTPS port. And for MySQL, the default port is 3306. So we can change those default ports, or you can change those default ports on other applications. That is, if you have an issue. And from what I've seen, probably 95% of these installs should go off without any issue. And of course, you're only going to be able to tell if you're going to have issues or conflicts once you've installed it and you do have some issues. So most likely, if you do have issues, take a look at the ports, the port settings, and take a look at the different applications that you might have running. Additionally, make sure that your antivirus programs aren't interfering, because if they have default blocking of services like XAMPP, then you would have to enable them for XAMPP applications. And again, this is on a case-by-case basis, depending on how your computer system is configured and set up. And of course, if you do want to update your configuration, you simply go to config here, and here you've got access to PHP Ini. So this is how it contains all of those PHP settings. You've got your HTTPS, so your SSL configuration. You can also reconfigure XAMPP here, phpmyadmin configuration, and for the most part, the default configuration should be fine. The only one that I really update is this HTTPD config, and this will contain where I'm located, where my server root is, so where the Apache is. So if you're switching where your server root is, which most of the time you don't have to do, but in the rare case that you do, this is where you would update it. So I would advise, if you do have to switch this, to try to work around it and not have to switch too much of the defaults, because then it turns out there's a lot of files that you have to change and update. We've got our server name, localhost 80. So this is our default port again that it's going to be using. And here's where the only part that actually changed. So it's this document root and directory. And changing this will actually allow you to change where your files are sitting on. So my default directory would have been C XAMPP, and I think it's the default folder is the HTTP docs for the web folder. So if you wanted to just go with the default setting, that's where you'd set your web files, and that's where you'd work off of it. If you want to work off of a separate folder, all you have to do is change the doc root, and this gives you the ability to have your current website folder, much as I do here. When I open up this, I can see where my folder is located, and we can see that I'm in this folder JJ, so it's H drive websites JJ. And this, of course, this is just the way that I've got things set up. And it's just going to be these two lines that I've updated in order to be able to run off of this folder. And usually the way that I do that is that I just change different folders. And then, of course, you do have to stop the Apache server if it's already started and start it again if you do make any changes here. And this gives me the ability to really easily have a whole bunch of folders with different files in there that I can use as my web folders and for my local machine. So I think that we're almost at the point where we're finished the unpacking and installing, and from this point it's going to be relatively easy, where we're just simply going to click next and launch the program. So I already do have it launched. And once it completes the setup process, once we complete the setup wizard, it gives us the ability just to start the control panel when we click finish. So over here I can see where the folders are installed, and your default web files are going to be sitting in here in htdocs. And so this index.php actually just redirects to a folder in the dashboard. And the dashboard, we can see a bunch of language settings there. It's got some how-to information. So if you do have some issues with your setup, if you're not able to simply launch the control panel, which is this over here, go to start, and actually see that default startup file, which looks exactly like this over here. So if you're not able to see this, then you would have to look through and see if you have any issues. And as I said, one of the main issues that people usually have is that problem with those ports. So check to see what other applications you have that might be using ports as communication, and one of the main ones usually is Skype or something like that that's also using port 80 that you might have conflicts with. So if you have Skype running and you try to run default install of XAMPP, you might have some port conflicts there. And so now you're ready to go, and we're ready to start using PHP and MySQL on your localhost. So when you go to localhost, you're going to see that default localhost setting when you launch the XAMPP server.